Last year, like every year, we planted over 100 million seedlings. It's how we're making sure the forest can supply all the wood and paper we need. It's nice to know we'll always have enough trees for the future. You see, we put them back after we use them.
Information Technology Leaders is sponsored by Weyerhaeuser. This week on Information Technology Leaders, Susan Mersereau, Senior Vice President and CIO of the Weyerhaeuser Company. Now here's your host, Laura Schildkraut.
Today's guest is the Senior Vice President and Chief Information Officer of the Weyerhaeuser Company. She is the first woman to be elected to their SVP level. She never expected to work in business, or wanted to for that matter. After attaining a master's degree at the University of Chicago, she began teaching in an inner-city school. This began a 10-year career in all facets of education. But in 1980, she'd experienced her last straw and decided to try the private sector. Weyerhaeuser felt right to her, and that began a new phase of her career, which lasted 24 years and counting. Please welcome Susan Mersereau. Where did you grow up?
Portland, Oregon, not far from here.
What was that upbringing like?
It was very active. I had a very active family, and we traveled extensively, got exposed to a lot of different cultures pretty early on.
When did you first know you were smart?
I think by conventional means, I always got good grades, but I never really considered myself smart from a people wandering around saying she's really smart, but I always did pretty well in school.
At age 16, you went to Rome. What was the overseas school, and why was that appealing?
My family wanted me and my two brothers to be exposed to a broader set of influences, so we moved to Rome, and
So the whole family moved?
Whole family moved, and the overseas school of Rome, the only problem was it was taught in Italian, and I was a junior in high school, and we had to learn math in Italian, and I had enough trouble with math in English, let alone Italian, so that was a very difficult period.
Had you prepared for that by learning Italian at all?
No, I just learned it as I went along. I've usually picked up languages pretty well.
That would be scary to have to go through your academic education in another language.
You learn very quickly.
I guess. Which college did you attend, and why was that appealing?
I went to Scripps College in Claremont, California, which is one of the 5 Harvey Mudd, Pomona, Pitzer, Claremont, and Scripps. The reason it was appealing to me at the time is they had a program of a 4-year degree program where all of the disciplines were interrelated. So you learned history and how it fit in with art and culture and science. And I've always enjoyed sort of the interrelationship of different topics, and they had a lot of focus on how everything interrelated.
So you knew that before you went to college that was an important facet, or did someone mention this school and then that became appealing to you?
A little bit of both. I'd heard a lot about the school. It was small. It was also an all-women's college, but yet you had the broader set of colleges, so you weren't completely isolated, and that appealed to me. I went to a very small high school, so I didn't want a really large college, but I didn't want to be totally isolated.
Either. In which area did you choose to focus?
Mostly history and languages. I was a German literature major and did a lot of work in history.
What did you expect to do with that degree?
Well, at the time, my goal was probably to get married and stay home and raise children. I didn't have much else in mind. I thought at one point I might want to teach, which eventually I did do, but I wasn't really focused on a career.
What did you learn at the Goethe Institute in Germany? Is that how you pronounce it?
The Goethe Institute.
Yeah, I wasn't
For
close.
whatever reason, in fact, I was just in Germany this last weekend, and a lot of my German came back to me.
Really?
I was thinking I was going to be a translator at the United Nations, and so I'd studied the written German language for 3 years, and I wanted to learn how to speak it. And the Goethe Institute in Radolfzell, Germany, focuses on getting you up to speed on speaking German very quickly. So I lived with a German family and studied about 8 hours a day to learn the language.
How long did it take you to become proficient?
By the end of the summer, I'd had enough both written, and by the end of the summer I was at least speaking, I thought, German. The people that I was speaking to from time to time would look at me like, you just missed it. In fact, I had a lot of near misses last week when I was trying to remember how to speak German.
How did your nomination for the Woodrow Wilson Scholarship affect the next phase of your academic life?
During that period of time, again, I wasn't really considering a career, and a combination of two things happened. I graduated Phi Beta Kappa and was a Woodrow Wilson nominee. And graduate schools then asked me to go to them and offered scholarships and fellowships, and I think that was the one advantage, is that several schools offered me advanced scholarships to go to graduate school. And I don't think they would have had I not had that kind of profile.
And which graduate school did you select?
University of Chicago.
And what area did you major in there?
History and economics was my focal point, although I got a teaching degree as part of the 2-year degree, and it was at the time called a Master of Arts in Teaching History.
Normally, I would recommend that students not go directly from an undergraduate into graduate work. Did you feel that this ended up working out well for you, or do you think it would have served you better had you done a little bit of work in between?
The reason I laugh at that is my daughter is a perfect example of going from an undergraduate, traveling for 3 or 4 years, and now thinking about graduate school. And I remember thinking, how can she do this? I mean, it was just, for me at the time, going from college to graduate school was just what people did. And the idea of finding oneself or experiencing a broader approach to things just wasn't part of our vocabulary. Having said that, I don't think you know yourself right out of college, and I think it's important to work, to travel, to spend some time figuring out what it is you like. So I think it's a much saner way than going directly to graduate school and then having a midlife crisis as to why am I in this field?
And what do I want to do? Well, after graduation, you began teaching in the Chicago School District. What did you teach?
I taught history in a inner city school. It was at secondary. I was pretty young at the time. My students were 18 and I was about 22. And it was a very rough school. I had, we were in the middle of gang warfare. We were maced a lot. The students taught me a lot. So it was a very, very difficult time during that period.
How long did you continue teaching at that level?
I taught for a year and then decided teaching was not for me. I'm not sure if it was the mace or teaching. It was one or the other, but it wasn't the right career path.
So was it hard to leave, or was that pretty easy?
It was very easy.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm out of here.
Well, you left that position, and what was your next project after that? What did you do?
I was still really interested in urban education, and I went to the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare for a period of time and helped look at federal programs in terms of helping inner city, and then was offered a job helping a teacher corps program at the University of Illinois help Hispanic teachers become teachers in the Pilsen area in Chicago, so that they could be successful teaching. So I did that for a while.
What were some of the things that you taught them about how to be successful teachers?
We spent a lot of time on culture and culture integration and the differences between the educational system here versus the educational system in Mexico, where many, and what to expect from students. How that was, I mean, I spent a lot of time on just the cultural integration piece, which has always interested me.
Was that kind of satisfying work for you?
Very,
Yeah.
very. The whole issue of how you bring people into a school system and allow it to have them move forward in the world and be successful, and using that school system was of great deal of interest. And working with a lot of the inner city kids, it's all they had, because they, many of them didn't have breakfast in the morning, came from families that really were never there, and so the educational system was really their mainstream into a lot of the culture that in American society. So it was very, very interesting learning at the time.
So this sort of ended up being your way to help those people rather than teaching them directly.
Yeah.
In a way. You kind of found your way back?
I felt a lot in terms of, again, at the time it was the 70s, and how could I contribute? And at the time it seemed a lot simpler than in hindsight it really was, because for many of them it was just a constant struggle to, you know, to eat, to get to school, to, you know, to continue to try to survive in that kind of environment.
Yeah. Within about a year, you relocated to the Pacific Northwest. Why the move?
I was married, and my husband at the time got a graduated from the University of Chicago Law School, and there were 7 or 8 of us that were all in graduate school, and we decided that people were abandoning the West Coast. The Boeing crisis had hit, so in our thinking, we would all come to the West Coast because everyone was leaving. That was about the level at which we thought about it.
So there would be opportunities there?
Yeah,
or?
a lot of opportunities. Even though everyone was leaving, there was somehow this sense that there would be a lot of vacancies.
Okay. So you're looking at that as an opportunity, not a reflection?
No, not at all. It would be a great opportunity because everyone had left Seattle and Portland, and, you know, we're relocating, so there'd clearly be jobs open for us.
How'd that work out for you?
We all got jobs. We were terribly naive at the time, in hindsight, to think people were just waiting with open arms to have us all come out, but most of us got jobs.
You were working for the University of Washington, the College of Education. What were you working on?
There was a federally funded project called the Voucher Project, which is similar to the charter school project, and we were basically looking at whether or not this could go in Seattle. It was the idea of if you as a parent got a chit for your child's education, you could turn it in at any school. So those schools that attracted parents and students stayed open, and those that didn't closed. So it was sort of laissez-faire competition in education, and that was a 2-year program that was funded, and I worked with it's called the Bureau of School Service and Research at the University of Washington as a staff member.
Then you quickly moved to the Seattle School District. Why the change?
My memory was that the teachers union voted down going forward with the voucher project at the time, and the Seattle School District, who we had worked very closely with, offered me a job as a policy analyst for the school board to do research into urban education problems, since I'd had a lot of experience in Chicago. And then I became director of research.
From there. Then this position migrated into a focus on MIS at the time, Management Information Systems.
It was
How did that happen?
Because I was director of research, I took over testing, evaluation, and then all of the operations research associated with using computers at the time for test scores and for statistical analysis and for processing all the data. So I became head of planning, testing, research, and MIS.
What were some of the skills that you think you demonstrated to get promoted into the director of MIS job?
I think at the time, again, just seeing how things fit together. The sense of, we were doing a lot of large-scale analysis, and I was able to sort of direct the research and the analysis to try to clearly understand. For example, we were dealing with desegregation issues, school closure issues, and a lot of the work I was doing was trying to direct the computers in terms of what they were to do, not the technical side, but more the analytical.
Well, if the analytical side was your focus, how did you deal with managing people who were more technical than you were?
I have never found that to be, for me, a problem, in the sense that I've always been blessed with people that worked with me and that are extremely technically competent. But I find as a manager, a lot of the skills that you need are non-technical. They have to do with trying to understand how to build relationships, trying to help people be effective, trying to build bridges between departments, trying to understand how one thing fits to another. So a lot of skills that you need in management are very different than you need technically, and if you can blend the two, it seems to work out well. Sometimes if someone's very technical and they go into management, it's not a good combination. But they think they need to be a manager.
Right. It's the only step in some companies. It's the only way to move. What was your role in the desegregation planning?
My role was to do the research having to do with school closure. So at the time, Seattle had a lot more schools than they needed, and they were going from a student body of 99,000 that they'd had in, I think, 1940 down to about 43,000. So they had a lot of excess capacity. So what we were trying to do is close the schools and then redistribute the students based on feeder patterns. And we had to then map the desegregation patterns to the numbers of students, the amount of space, and the ethnic capacity of the feeder system. So it was like a very large operations research model. We'd close a school, we'd redistribute them, we'd check the status of the demographics and then where they would go. So we were combining school closure and desegregation all at the same time.
Imagine that may not have made you very popular.
I was very unpopular, and particularly when we recommended closing Queen Anne High School. I had grandparents that came out of the woodwork that were calling me, accusing me of destroying their life, and how could I do this, and their children went, or their parents went to Queen Anne, how could we do this? I was in the paper a lot. Susan Mersereau says this school has to close. It was not a positive period of time.
Almost makes you long
Susan
for
Mersereau has recommended closing these schools, which are going to cause this change in the desegregation pattern. So no, it was not a particularly positive period of my life.
Almost makes you long for those days in the Chicago inner city school system.
That's right. That's right. But it was similar, similar issue.
It's somewhat rare in life to be able to look at a specific incident and say that this was a turning point. But in 1980, you were in a school board meeting and something happened. What happened at that meeting?
I had been working on this school closure plan associated with desegregation for probably 3 or 4 years. We'd had community meetings. We had finally gotten everyone to agree that certain schools needed to be closed and we were going to do certain feeder patterns. And I was sitting in the front row, and the school board started talking about, well, did we really study this enough? And was it really analyzed enough? And had we thought about this or that? And the attorney stood up and said, you have a very good point. I think we need to do an environmental impact statement on the environmental impact statement. And at that point, I was out of there. That was it. No more study. So I resigned, and very quickly, without any clue as to what was next. It was just, I knew I couldn't sit in that chair one more meeting. That was it.
As you began to look into the private sector, what was your process? What was your thought process going through that?
It was not very systematic. I've had about 10 years of experience in the public sector. Now I'm ready to move on to the private sector. How do you do that? I made a list of firms, and I said, I'll just start down the list and call on them, which I did. So I had Boeing and Safeco and Weyerhaeuser and a number of them, and I just called and I said I'd like to talk to someone and set up appointments and just went and interviewed. And several of them offered me a job. But I also had to think about what could I take from my experience into the private sector that was of value to them. It wasn't just, hi, here I am, I'm great, I love people.
See my press?
Yeah. And Weyerhaeuser offered me a job as a program analyst, helping businesses set up plans for what they needed to do with information technology.
What was it about Weyerhaeuser that was so appealing?
Probably what is still appealing to me is that I came to the campus and all I could see everywhere were trees. It was the most beautiful campus I've ever seen. And there was something about when I talked to the people and interviewed, they were in it for the long run. It wasn't like we're .com and we have all this exciting stuff, but we may be gone tomorrow. It's a 100-year company, and they'll be there 100 years from now. And so there was something about the longevity and the value system that very much fit more my traditional values. And you know, I have found I never expected to stay as long as I have, but I have found that has been sort of a constant theme, is that most of the people have a long-term perspective and have very, very solid values and ethics that are consistent with mine.
Did your grandparents have anything to do with the fact that Weyerhaeuser seemed comfortable for you?
Both grandparents on both sides came or were in lumber, and so I was very comfortable with the notion of a lumber company, and being in the Pacific Northwest, you're surrounded by trees. So I think that also there was a level of comfort with what forest products was.
Yeah. Now, at this point, you've had a lot of responsibility, and now you're kind of going back to being an individual contributor. Did that feel like a relief or a step backwards?
It was a relief. I find that there's sort of a level I get to in management, and then I say, well, wouldn't it just be nice to go and work on a systems analysis program, or do some individual writing and not worry about people and personnel. And that has been sort of a continued theme as I get to that point, and I think, well, it'd be very nice to be an individual contributor for a while, and then suddenly I find myself managing again. So I'm not sure how that happens.
I think it's called competence.
Or I have some other words for it, but
we'll stick with that one for now.
Competence sounds fine.
As you got to know your way around the company, which skills from your public sector days did you bring with you, and which of those traits did you need to leave behind in order to be successful in this kind of environment?
One of the things that I felt really helped is that when you're in the public sector, you have to spend a lot of time with influence and relationship building and moving across boundaries, because there isn't the profit motive that there is. So there's a lot of consensus building and relationship building, and that was really helpful, that I had to do that at a very young age, and figure out how to make things work without a lot of authority or power or control. The flip side is that I think the private sector is very results focused and very bottom line oriented, and to the extent that you can contribute to that and understand how you can make a contribution, you need to do that. It's not a community service type of thing where you can say, well, I like communities or I like people. You really have to demonstrate how what you do adds value constantly.
Yeah. Does that clarity appeal to you?
And it's one of the reasons I think teaching was somewhat frustrating, because I'm a very results-oriented person, and sometimes at the end of the day I'd look over and say, what have I done? And it's one of those things, I think, in teaching you don't often know for a while, and I'm probably too impatient.
How did the AT&T divestiture impact your career?
I had started out in a program analysis role, and during the AT&T divestiture, Weyerhaeuser sponsored a project to look at how we were going to deal with the whole voice network, and asked me to lead the project. So I did that over a period of time, and the result of it was to build a separate data network and then bill our internal voice network, and go with 2 or 3 other carriers other than AT&T, and they asked me if I wanted to head up the department. And at the time, if you'd asked me about the insides of a telephone or data transmission, I would have just looked at you bleary, but I said, fine, no problem. So I started out as director of telecommunications.
Did you handle this management responsibility any differently than you'd handled management in the past?
Not so much. It was more technical than some of the areas I'd been in, so I did spend a lot of time reading and clearly trying to understand. We were on the forefront of actually building a data network globally, and that was a lot of fun. Now we just take it for granted, but at that time it was a whole new venture, so I had to get pretty familiar with a lot of the technical skills, but it was pretty much the same, which is trying to figure out what the problems are I was trying to solve, and then who best to put in places that could help me solve them.
During this time, you also participated in the executive program at Stanford University. What were some of the most valuable things that you learned from that program?
It was a very interesting, it was almost like an advanced MBA, but 50% of the class was international. And we had a lot of case studies, and it was a reinforcement of the fact that the way business operates in Australia is both the same and different from the United States. So helped to give me a real global perspective that I still resonate with a lot of the different things that were going on at the time.
And it looked like they may have had a plan when they sent you there, because you were soon promoted to Vice President of IT. How did that promotion come about?
I had been in telecommunications about 5 years, and at Weyerhaeuser, the IT group became like its own business, and we had gone out and we were marketing software, and the venture was profitable in some areas and not profitable in others. And so when I got back from Stanford, and a year later, they asked me to my supervisor, boss at the time, was moved to another position, and they asked if I would take over all of IT and help bring it back inside the company. So it was a specific change management role that they asked me to do.
Did you feel ready for it?
I felt ready for a new challenge. The it just comes along with it.
You were also the first female VP of a division. How did that feel, and did it have an impact on you?
It really has never, that part of it has never really, I think to other people it's probably a lot bigger deal than it is to me, simply because I don't think about, well, I want to be the first female or I want to do this. It's sort of like I'm always drawn to areas of challenge and areas that interest me, and whatever happens along the way, that's sort of what goes on. But I acknowledge the fact, I think it's really important that as I go into positions and other women go into positions, it allows people to see that that's something that is there for them too. So I think from just that perspective, it was important.
It almost sends the message that it's a big deal, but it's really no big deal, in a way.
I think that, again, I think if you focus on that, or you focus on a position, or you focus on, I want to make this much money, instead of what it is you're interested in, I think you can get off track.
What were some of the major IT initiatives that were completed during that time?
Again, one of the things we did that I look back on, it was very unique, that we built this worldwide data network by negotiating with all the countries in Europe to have data be transmitted from one area to the other. And it was a very large capital project. And as a result of it, we separated out for the first time voice and data and started managing them as two separate entities. We also began to migrate the company toward more common applications. We're still not there, but it was a major beginning.
Well, after about 5 years, you started questioning whether or not you wanted to be a technologist. And what was the answer?
I had never planned technology as a career. So what I've always loved is systems, and I decided to go back and get another master's degree in organization systems change while I was working. So I went back to Antioch University and got a degree in organization systems change, and my goal was to then go into some kind of organizational effectiveness or organizational psychology. So I felt like I'd been in technology about 10 or 12 years, and it was time to try something else.
Did you think that that would be at Weyerhaeuser?
I wasn't clear at all whether it would be at Weyerhaeuser. I was clear what I wanted to do, and I felt if Weyerhaeuser had an opportunity to use that and to find a mutual opportunity that the two of us could agree upon, that would be really good. But I wasn't wedded at the time to that.
What was going on in the IT department at this time?
The IT department was going through a major change of sort of looking across the company and pulling all the separate business applications into one, they called it a common IT group, and felt like there had to be some just major change from the perspective of forcing a lot of groups into a single unit that hadn't been before.
So the timing kind of worked out for everyone.
Yeah, timing was perfect.
What was your new title and what was the scope of your responsibility?
I was the Vice President of Business Services, and I took over total quality management for the company, which was our organizational change approach. But I also inherited about, I'm not sure how many, 20 or 30 separate business services, including corporate aviation, which I hadn't really looked into. So I suddenly found myself managing a group of helicopter pilots that did spraying and fertilizing and firefighting, and a number of fixed-wing airplanes, and I was negotiating whether we were going to buy a Gulfstream or not, and this was not in my career path.
No.
But I learned a lot about airplanes during that period.
I mean, this almost sounds like you have this organizational effectiveness thing, and then any other department just falls under this umbrella.
They consolidated 3 departments and created what was called Weyerhaeuser Business Services. So they pulled in corporate aviation, business services, and total quality, and pulled it all together and said, you can call yourself whatever you are, but that's what your portfolio is. So I said, okay.
So did you understand the full scope of the job when you
no,
said yes?
I was so delighted to be given total quality because I wanted to get into organizational effectiveness. The problem is I spent so much time in the other services, I rarely got a chance to be in total quality.
I think you got taken there.
It was a very interesting 4 years, a period of time.
Which areas came easily to you and which parts were more of a stretch besides the aviation?
I think they all, again, if I step back and treated them as a system, and what was the management system we were going to put in place, it pretty much all felt like it organically worked together. Probably the biggest stretch I had was a project that I got involved in of building a sewer under I-5. And we hired a firm that got into a machine that acted like a mole.
Okay.
And that machine hit a rock under I-5, and then we got into a big dispute as to whose responsibility. And that was quite a difficult process because I had to learn a lot about who has responsibility for below the earth, under the freeway, and where do the lines. It was very technical. So that was probably the most difficult. I learned a lot about sewer building.
I imagine you did. Did you ever just wake up in the morning and say, how did I get to here?
Yeah, there were a couple of times. We had a situation in one of our buildings where an old plumbing blew a lot of the fixtures off the wall.
Nice.
And I was called in the morning. Situations like that, I did start to wonder what I'd done with my life and career. But
now, where was that whole organizational effectiveness thing I was interested in doing? How did the role evolve during the 10 years that you were in that quote-unquote organizational effectiveness position?
Well, after probably 4 or 5 years, I was invited by one of our business vice presidents to join their business as a vice president of organizational effectiveness, and it's our largest business, and I was really able to work both at a strategic level with acquisitions, how we tied the acquisition in, at a plant level and at a team level, and that was a very, very wonderful set of experiences, trying to understand and diagnose what was not working and then figure out an approach to it. And somewhere during that period of time I also inherited human resources, so that was a interesting experience in and of itself.
It sounds like what you may have liked about that is instead of being very broad and maybe somewhat shallow, that gave you the opportunity to be narrow or narrower and a little deeper, to kind of see something holistically.
I could go both ways. I could either go very deep into a plant problem, or I could be dealing on a very large strategic level and moving back and forth with those problems really interested me and kept my focus.
Did you ever think you'd be back in IT?
No.
No.
No. I sometimes wake up in the morning and wonder, how did I get back here? It's like some dream that you're not quite sure of where it is, but it's started to make a lot more sense.
Or you could wake up with the sewers, or you could wake up with the inner city schools or the bad press.
Right.
Yeah. How was the IT organization different than it had been 10 years earlier?
It's a lot bigger. The technology has changed in some ways it hasn't. The use of the internet, e-business, web services is a whole nother dimension that we weren't dealing with before. We've acquired 2 or 3 companies, so our company now has close to 60,000 employees. We have 33,000 desktops. We're global. We have a lot of integration challenges, and so it's just the scope of it is much broader. The technology is a lot more vast in terms of numbers of things, and the need for integration is probably much higher. So it's a pretty large area as far as just scope and challenge.
When you were asked to take this on, did you waver at all, or?
No.
No.
No. What I get drawn to are challenges, and the larger the better. So this seemed like a very large challenge, and it seemed like it was pretty extensive in terms of the areas that we would be dealing with, and so I didn't waver. It seemed right. It seemed set. I mean, I wouldn't have thought about it, but once it was suggested to me, it seemed like a pretty good idea.
Sense. How did your experience in organizational effectiveness impact your approach to IT leadership this time around?
I think the experience, having spent at least 10 years in the operations and the businesses and working at the plant level, it was so clear to me that IT has to be helping people every day do their job better, as opposed to, here's some technology, use it. And so the need to connect IT, not to strategy, which is important, but to the person out there where we're having fewer and fewer people. It has to be simple, it has to be easy to use, it has to be understandable, and it has to make a difference. Otherwise, what we're doing is putting in costs and complexity and not solving business problems. So I just think that exposure and spending time in the businesses was really invaluable.
You've said that you need to be on the same page before you can solve a problem. How do you make sure that that happens?
By asking questions and by making sure that when people are in a room or a meeting, they're all sort of telling the same story. Because if you start to solve a problem and you think you all understand the problem is, and you haven't really discussed that, you're jumping into a solution, but you're not really even clear what the problem is. And a number of meetings that I start out with, we're into solutions. And sometimes I just say, what is it we're trying to solve? And everyone has a different answer. So that tells me that we have to step back and and all orchestrate the same story before we jump into problem solving.
And you've also said if you build a process, they won't come. What does that mean?
I have found IT people in particular extremely confident that if you just put in the process, everything will work. And my experience is that there are people connected to those processes, and those people have strong feelings oftentimes about process and about what it is they do. And so paying attention again to the people side as opposed to just you put in the process, or I sent them an email, why didn't they read it, is pretty important.
Last February, the Weyerhaeuser board elected you to be a senior vice president. What has that distinction meant for you, and what has it meant for the IT department?
I think for the IT department, it's been important to be at the table. IT has become such an important component of company direction setting, and it's been really important that I be there at the time when the senior team is talking through issues I know are going to have an implication in terms of the systems we're putting in, the data we need, the information. And I think IT is so much, when we think about global operations, so much a part of that, that it's just hard to separate it out anymore. For me personally, it's been a real, I would say, privilege to operate at a strategic level of a company as large as Weyerhaeuser and get involved in the kinds of issues and dialogues and concerns that we have. I love operating at the strategic level, and so this is like, you know, a very exciting time and a very exciting place to be.
What are some of the significant opportunities you see for the IT industry over the next couple of years?
I think this whole issue of simplifying and what I call being more of a seamless supply chain. In business, we're looking at how to shorten the path from a customer to the supplier. And a customer puts an order in, they get an invoice, and we're trying to take as many steps out of that as possible. I think in the IT industry, we need to do the same thing. We have so many different components that have to work together, but it's not an easy, seamless, end-to-end delivery system. And I think as more of the vendors start to integrate their technology so that for a user, it's simple, that's really where the opportunities are. People don't have time to memorize multiple passwords and to relearn you know, PDA instructions and understand their laptop, you know, the upgrade every 6, they just don't have time. So whatever is going to have to happen is going to have to be simple, and think about sort of taking the pain and the complexity out of it.
Well, conversely, what are some of the biggest challenges that you see for the IT industry over the next couple of years? Demonstrating value, getting the return and the benefits out of the investment, and stabilizing to some extent, which we're starting to see. We're seeing a lot of consolidation and a lot of real leverage and benefits, but I think that for many people it's still, the jury's yet out. There's been a lot of investment that really hasn't yielded the promise, and I think the IT industry I think the technology is going to have to really demonstrate to the bottom line its value. How would you describe your management style?
I don't know that I would describe it. I would describe more me in terms of probably being curious. But I don't know that I would describe, I'm probably not a domineering, hierarchical person. So whatever the opposite of that is.
that would be your style?
That would be my style.
Why do you keep a hula hoop in your office?
That's a good question. First of all, I have challenged a number of people in my office as to whether they can do a hula hoop, mostly to see how they'll respond. And some people pick it up, try to do it, it drops to the floor, and they kind of say, that's the last time I'm going to do that. Other people look at me like I've just asked them sort of, why in the world would you ask me to do a hula hoop? And then I've demonstrated I can do a hula hoop, so it's not like I'm asking them to do anything I wouldn't do myself, but it has more to do with just what their reactions are to it. And I also think it's important to have fun. And sometimes things get pretty serious, so we have toys and candy and hula hoops and thing to play.
Who are your role models?
I probably have more, when I think back in terms of people that have influenced me, it's probably more leaders like Indira Gandhi and Eleanor Roosevelt and some of the, probably some of the more spiritual people that have, like Gandhi, that have been more my role models.
Why do you believe that sometimes you can't help someone?
Because I think that as a manager, you're a teacher. And if someone is convinced that they are perfect, they don't have problems, they don't want feedback, they don't want input, they can't learn. And if they can't learn, you can't teach. And for some people, I think you just need to understand that they are non-learners, and there's a limit to what you can do as a manager, as a coach, to help them be effective, because they don't really want feedback or want input. And I just find that it's a two-way dimension in terms of both teaching and learning.
Are you a better manager or a leader?
I've never quite understood the distinction between the two. So I think of myself as very well organized, which is more the management side. The leader side is more trying to project into the future, which is what I'm constantly doing. So I don't know that you can be one without the other, because you have to be able to execute what you envision.
Right.
And so I think you need a combination of both.
Are you a good bowler?
My staff probably put you up onto that.
Yes, they did.
At one of our recent retreats, I suggested we do a team building activity, and I suggested bowling. And immediately everyone decided that I must be an expert bowler to suggest this.
I think it's the hula hoop that probably set you up for that.
But I am not an expert bowler. I don't really like bowling. I just thought it'd be a good team building activity. So we started out and we got bowling shirts and all went out. And I was on a team, and there's a line at a bowling alley. Now, I haven't bowled a lot, so you have to bear with me. There's a line at a bowling alley, and I kept throwing the ball. First of all, I couldn't get the ball to stay in the bowling lane for a while. It kept going over. But then I mastered enough to at least have it roll down, and I kept seeing zeros every time I would go back, and this thing went bleeped. And halfway through, I wasn't getting any score. And one of my managers in another team had the courtesy to come over and explain to me that I was stepping over the line and fouling, and the bleep was really that I had stepped over the line. So I managed to go through my first entire thing of bowling, and people recorded this on camera and put it on the web. This is how much the team building was on it. So we had a great time, but I don't think I got past 49 on our first round. So
you've described yourself as a lifelong learner. How does that end up manifesting itself in some of your career decisions?
As long as I'm feeling like I'm growing and challenged, I'm very happy. When I get to a point where I feel like I'm not learning or I'm not growing, I start to get restless, and I know it's time to shift. And at that point, I usually shift and something happens, and I go into another career or I go into another role. But it's really important that I'm in an area where I'm learning.
You've served on a lot of boards throughout your career. Why has that been so important to you?
First of all, I think it's really important to give back to a community. But more than that, I just enjoy being on boards I care about because it's a way of contributing to areas that mean a lot to me.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the board contributions you've been most proud of?
I've been involved in a number of arts boards, and one of the things that I have found is that sometimes bringing a business perspective to some of the areas that people are struggling in has been helpful, because a lot of people who are very creative or in the arts world haven't had time to be in the business world. So I find that that's been something I can contribute. I served on the United Way board for a number of years and found, again, thinking about the system and how to improve and diagnose problems and bring solutions to it was really something that I could offer.
What were some of the greatest challenges you've had in being a female executive?
Believing and holding my own voice. For a number of years, I think I thought I had to sort of be someone other than who I was, and then I just gave up. I thought, I can't be anything other than who I am. So being clear on that and holding that, as opposed to trying to be like other people or try to be in a position where I'm going to be winning a lot of approval, has been probably the most difficult thing, is just to hang on to who I am. Now, I don't know if that's female or male or just being an executive, but I find that sometimes it's hard to stay the course.
What career advice do you have for people in terms of managing their careers?
I just think continuing to wake up in the morning and say, what is it that excites me, and move toward it. And again, I talked about this to a group the other day, is continually finding places where you can be who you are. The worst thing I hear people say is, I can't be who I am. And if you can't offer who you are, I don't know what you have to offer.
What did you mean by not everyone has your best interest in mind?
I think that it's really important as you go through your career to find supervisors or mentors that care about you, that have your best interest in mind. And if you are working for people that don't, I think it's not a good thing, because ultimately they're not going to be supporting you in your career. So I oftentimes talk to people about finding bosses or people that they really want to work for, who they can work well with, who people feel comfortable with, and that they'll support them. Because I think if you get yourself into a situation where people are not supporting you, it can be very adverse on your career.
Two other things that you've said. You've said that life isn't about fairness and that you are dispensable. How do you manage those things? I
think that, again, for a number of years I used to think about life being fair and good people got in good situations and good positions. And what I've realized is that oftentimes people end up in places or situations where I can't explain it, but it's a lot of other factors are coming in. So for me to waste time on who got in what role or why someone got this and I didn't is just a waste of time. And I think that it's more important not what happens to you, but how you manage what happens to you. Because there's just a lot of things that happen that don't seem fair, and to spend one moment even thinking about it is really not very productive. So I think it's more how you manage yourself as opposed to actually what happens. And on the dispensability, again, I think it's so important to realize that, particularly when you're working for companies or for others, you are dispensable. It's a hard lesson, but you know, you can leave and life goes on. And so making sure you're paying attention to relationships and your family and some kind of other balance, I think is important, because there is life beyond wherever it is you're working.
Where would you like to see yourself in 5 years?
I have never had a 5-year plan. What I do know is that wherever I will be learning and challenged and pretty excited about what I'm doing.
I'd like to close with a quote from someone that Susan is working with. When I think about what makes Susan such a strong asset to Weyerhaeuser, 3 things come to mind. Initially, there's her natural leadership abilities. She commands respect and handles herself well in all situations. She's known for her willingness to take on the toughest issues and to see them through to resolution. She has the courage to make the difficult decisions, and she's able to challenge the system appropriately when necessary. Then there's her intuitive ability to read a situation and respond with a full and thoroughly thought out solution. She always approaches problem solving with a win-win mentality, and most importantly, the right answer for the company. She doesn't play politics, and she's respected for that. She has strong credibility with the Weyerhaeuser senior management team, and IT has never had a better reputation than it currently has. Finally, there's her willingness to coach people to make them better. She is an inspiration for clear individual accountability. She's an excellent role model for other women in the company, and men too for that matter. She's been incredibly helpful to me personally, and many times when faced with a challenge, I will ask myself, what would Susan do in this situation? She's been a wonderful mentor.
At Weyerhaeuser, we think trees are too precious to use just once. So every year we collect and recycle around 84,000 train cars full of old office memos, empty boxes, and last Sunday's sports sections. And we use the fiber to make new products again. And again, and again, and again. Weyerhaeuser, the future is growing.